Senator Tkachuk.
Now, I'm sure that when you saw all these papers, you thought, oh my God. But in actuality, what I wanted to do is make the type large enough so I won't have to wear my glasses, and so therefore it's not going to be as long as you think. It's hard to believe that everybody here except me and the Liberal caucus were appointed after 2009. That's all there's left, right? So, and after what Dennis said, I'm not sure how I should take that. But nonetheless, a lot of us have spent a lot of time together and had a lot of wars together, but we also had a lot of good times together as well. I want to thank all of you for your kind remarks. I also want to thank Senator Furey for his kindness to me and my family, not only today, but on many past occasions. Your ruling on allowing the emergency debate on Kinder Morgan was appreciated by Western Canada and got the debate started in the House of Commons. We began our friendship working together when you were the chair of Internal Economy in 2009, and I was appointed the vice chair. Very much appreciated. And those were difficult times, but we managed to weather them, and we're still here today. I joined the Senate so long ago that there were still two lifers in our caucus, Senator Orville Phillips and John Michael MacDonald from Nova Scotia. The former retired at 75, and the latter died in office at 87. There was in the previous on Center Block, right behind the Senate chamber, there was a little statue of Senator MacDonald, who was the last lifer, and both were active senators when I got here to our caucus, right to the end, and I feel fortunate to have served with them. Just as they represented the end of an era, so do I. I am the last of Prime Minister Mulroney's appointments, and I'll be forever grateful to him for sending me here. This will be a difficult speech for me. Usually I try and make them difficult for those on the opposite side. But let me begin by thanking my family for their love and their support, their patience during my time here. And they're the most important part of my life. When I was appointed at the age of 48, my parents were still with us. And while they didn't come here for my maiden speech, they were able to come here for the throne speech in 1994, which was given by the first Ukrainian Governor General. That was Ray Natishin, who also happened to be the son of a fellow Saskatchewan senator appointed by John Diefenbaker. My mother, Pauline, got to sit on the floor of the Senate, which is appropriate, as she was the one who would introduce debate at home during dinner. And my father, George, was proudly content to sit in the viewing gallery. I have come full circle in a way. In the gallery today are my daughter, Teresa, and who flew in from Green Bay last night, and my son, Brad, who flew in from Vancouver. They're joined by Teresa's partner, Keith Boy, and Terry's son, my grandson, Braden Benedetti. Brad's wife, my daughter-in-law, Nancy Martin, and their two children, my grandchildren, Faye and Max, were not able to join us today, but will be celebrating with us this weekend in Saskatoon. And of course, my wife, Sharon, who is here. We were high school sweethearts, and she is still my rock, and all our lives revolve around her strength and her wisdom. I hope you'll take the time to meet with them later in the day. I want to thank my staff. When I was first appointed, I was lucky to be able to hire Rhonda Walker, who is here, who managed to work on a PhD and have 3 children while she was with me. Now, I was busy, but she was obviously a lot busier than me. Sitting with her in the gallery are Katerina Shave, my parliamentary assistant, who has worked for me for 22 years, and Robin Hay, my Director of Parliamentary Affairs and Legislative Assistant, who has been with me for 15 years. They'll both continue to contribute to the work of the Senate as I take my leave from this place. and all have contributed greatly to the work I've been able to do in the Senate and in politics. They have my everlasting gratitude. I want to thank all those who work here as well in the administration, the clerks who manage our committees under the most trying circumstances, especially for the committees that I have been fortunate enough, or for them, unfortunate enough to be on. A special thanks to those clerks and library staff, past and present, who have worked on committees that I chaired. Your professionalism and your advice was always appreciated. My thanks to the security personnel who keep us safe. None of us who were here will forget October 2014 when they responded quickly and efficiently. We were all thankful for them. As I said in my maiden speech, some 27 years ago almost, it is a wonderful country when the son of an electrician from Baie-Comeau, who grew up in a semi-detached house, can reach out to a second-generation Ukrainian Canadian who grew up in the back of a general store in a small town called Weardale, in the riding of Prince Albert, and appoint him to the Senate of Canada. I arrived here on June the 10th, 1993, and at that time, anger in the West resulted in a new conservative voice in the country, led by Preston Manning and the Reform Party. In the House, the Bloc Québécois, led by Lucien Bouchard, who won almost all the Francophone ridings in Quebec, formed the opposition. I leave the Senate, with the political situation in the country somewhat echoing what it was when I entered it. The Conservatives lost the election. There is anger in the West, and the Bloc has been resurrected in Quebec. This is where we are, some 4 years after Stephen Harper, during whose government support for separation in Quebec declined, and there was unity in the rest of the country. Though I was disappointed in the result of the election at October 2019, I congratulate the Liberals on their victory. I can't call them the Progressives. I just can't bring myself to, so you'll excuse me. I congratulate the Liberals on their victory and savor the fact that the election gave me a little more time to prepare for this week. When I was appointed in '93, the Senate was on the cusp of its summer recess, and with the election that year, I did not give my maiden speech until the following one on February 22nd, 1994. And I began that speech, which was a reply to the speech from the throne, with the words, "I find myself with the unexpected freedom and inclination to say too much, forgetting as I wrote this that, God willing, I have another 26 years to say what I want to say." Well, God was willing, and here we are 26 years later. I've enjoyed every minute of it, and I'm still speaking. When I arrived here, I was no sooner sworn in than I was rushed into the banking committee featuring the governor of the bank, John Crow. It was in the East Bloc, and I got lost. Over the next 26 years, I was a member of 10 different standing committees and 4 special committees. I was a chair or deputy chair of one or the other committee for all but a total of 1 year and a half of those 26 years. Committee work is important because this is where we all learn to, where we have to play well, as I say, with others. In all my 26 years, there were only maybe 3 instances where I didn't manage to get along with my fellow Liberals on committee, and only 1 instance with 1 individual that was never resolved, and I have no regrets about that. One of the things I tried to encourage as chair was for the committee to interrupt its business and embark on short studies, 1 to 3 meetings, as an issue arose that was newsworthy or of national importance. I encourage committees to continue that practice after I leave. Maybe Transport and Communication could investigate and invite Ezra Levant to appear to inquire about why investigators from Election Canada hauled him in because he wrote a book critical of Justin Trudeau. During my last decade here, I spent a good portion of my time working on Aboriginal issues. I was on the Aboriginal Affairs Committee, moved a private member's bill on First Nation self-government called S10. It was seconded by Walter Twin, chief of the Sawridge First Nation, and it was supported by all the chiefs in the province of Alberta. I was also made chair of the Finance Committee and served, I think also in Treaty 8 as well. I was also made chair of the Finance Committee and served on the special committee looking into Pearson Airport. That was 1995. 96, I became deputy chair of Banking, Trade and Commerce, and I think there was only a 6-month period since then that I have not been a member of that committee. My most rewarding experience was co-chair of the Progressive Conservative Election Committee for the 1997 election. My co-chair was our late and lamented colleague Pierre-Claude Nolan, our former Speaker. And for that election, I also recruited a young man named Percy Muckler to be campaign chair for New Brunswick, and it was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. We elected 20 members in 97 and were restored to party status. That would not have been possible if we did not have a Conservative Senate caucus that basically functioned as our national caucus. Senators volunteered to raise money, serve on the executive, work on the campaign. Senators like Jerry St. Germain, who was our party president, David Angus and Michael Meehan, our fundraisers, along with volunteers like Peter White, who was chair of our fund, worked tirelessly to repair the damage of the 93 campaign. Having only 2 members in the House, Elsie Wayne and Jean Charest, to whom we all owe an enormous debt, and counting on party members in the Senate to carry on the work of the Conservative caucus is what made all this possible. The Liberal Party experienced a similar situation when they were reduced to 35 members under Michael Ignatieff. The Liberal Senate caucus became important to that party's survival and revival, and I'm sure they have their stories. In these 2 situations, the Senate helped preserve our national parties that have served this country so well throughout our history. My second decade here, the first of this century, became full of optimism, but as everyone remembers, that optimism was interrupted by the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center on September the 11th, 2001, and the world has never been the same. I was privileged to serve on the Special Senate Committee on Anti-Terrorism, and in 2005 I introduced in the Senate a bill called the Justice for Victims of Terrorism Act. Stockwell Day moved a sister bill in the House, and mine fell off the order paper a number of times. But persistence pays off, and because of in September 2011, 10 years after 9/11, it was introduced as government legislation under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, became law in 2012. And for this, I say thank you to Prime Minister Harper, as should we all. Canadians also owe a big thanks to the Canadian Coalition Against Terror, and especially Cheryl Sapira and Danny Eisen, who encouraged me to introduce the bill and were with me in my office every step of the way. In my maiden speech, I said that we know as parliamentarians that our system benefits from strong national parties, and it is within broad-based parties that people learn skills necessary to govern, to debate, to sell ideas, and to compromise. To give a little, and as Jesse Jackson put it, to find common ground. I have never been convinced by the arguments put forward by this government that getting rid of party affiliations in the Senate makes for an independent Senate. The Senate has always been independent, and the Supreme Court of Canada affirmed that in its 2014 reference when it wrote, "The contrast between elections for members of the House and executive appointment for senators is not an accident of history. The framers of the Constitution Act deliberately chose executive appointment of senators to allow the Senate to play the specific role of a complementary legislative body of sober second thought." What the court said by that virtue of their appointment tenure, senators are thoroughly independent and able to engage in sober second thought. It has nothing to do with independence from the party. It has to do with tenure. The new definition of independence is a willful misinterpretation of the original meaning of Senate independence to advance a policy agenda. We will lose something if we get rid of parties in the Senate. David Smith wrote in his chapter on the Senate in his book, The Constitution in the Hall of Mirrors, legislative bodies and political systems need the articulation of conflicting views if they are to be strongly democratic. The law of politics bids debate. In the well-known words of Edmund Burke, our antagonist is our helper. The Senate requires patience, and it should. And rather than getting rid of the official opposition and changing the rules to move legislation along at the speed of government likes, we should welcome dissenting opinions, strongly made. Opposing views within parties and within caucuses already force compromise. When we meet as a conservative caucus, we practice the art of compromise because there are differing points of view. And just because members of a caucus enter the chamber or the House speaking with one voice doesn't mean they're partisan. It means they're a team made up of team players. Independence from parties does not make senators independent. Tenure does. And groups, if they are together long enough, will become as partisan as parties. Parties are an organizing mechanism, and an effective one, no more, no less. You dispense with that mechanism at your peril. The media bear a portion of that blame, since they are the ones who do the most. No one has a monopoly on identifying problems in a society. No one. Our differences of opinion, strongly held, are always over solutions, not the problem itself in this great and wonderful country. And when our opinions of those of others are seen only through the prism of partisanship, the effect is to devalue them, discount them, before they have even been expressed, as if nothing but blind allegiance could possibly lie behind those arguments, with no thought having been given to them whatsoever. I resent that. It is the worst form of identity politics. What do we have on our side as a minority in this place? We have the rules, the right to oppose, and an obligation to tell our story, so that the people know there is more to the story than what the government is telling, and it's called debate. I don't oppose just to oppose. I oppose because I disagree. And I use the tools I have available to me. And defending the views of the political minority in the country is the responsibility of the majority. And if you abandon that principle, you abandon democracy itself. And that is a fact. Senator Joyle's book, Protecting Canadian Democracy, was mentioned and recommended as required reading during the tributes to him. And one of his contributors to that book, the historian Janet Asenstadt, wrote that political thinkers and parliamentarians at the time of Confederation thought of Parliament as a system of checks and balances. It fell to the Senate, she wrote, to exercise the power of the check on Cabinet and the Commons, and the Senate has the task of delaying or obstructing legislation when it appeared the Cabinet was attempting to use its majority in the Commons to silence dissent and suppress minorities. What I fear now is the Senate that silences dissent and suppresses the minority in this place. Henry Kissinger, a Jewish refugee from Germany during the Second World War, wrote in the 1950s that it is the essence of a democratic system that the loser can accept his defeat with relative grace. It is the essence of a totalitarian system that the victor assumes the right to proscribe his opponents. I have very few regrets as I leave, but one of them is that I never spoke up. I never spoke up when Alan Rock, the president of the University of Ottawa, wrote a letter effectively preventing conservative commentator Ann Coulter from speaking at an event that had been organized. I regret it not so much because I didn't stand up for Ann Coulter, a conservative speaker. I regret it because I didn't stand up for free speech. The whole Senate should be embarrassed. The press, who represent the very concept of free speech, sat on their hands. And I'll tell you what, senators, if they don't fight for her, they will not fight for me, and they will not fight for you. And then God help us. I am an optimist, though. I envy the future of my grandchildren. I appreciate this wonderful gift of a parliamentary democracy inherited from the geniuses of the past. I do worry about the constant virtue signaling and the mob mentality that takes hold on our social media to shut down voices, usually, but not always, conservative. I worry about race baiting, and I worry about culture wars. I am proud of our culture. I really am. I am proud of what we have accomplished in our country, and many seek perfection, but there is no heaven on earth. All we can do is continue to confront our failures. That is called human progress. Culture wars and race baiting prevent us from getting to know each other, and that, my friends, is a recipe for disaster. I want to say how much I cherish my present and past caucus members and leaders, and how much I love being with them. My favorite meeting, gee, I should have taken that box of Kleenex, was always the Senate caucus, because I agree with the other members or not, this was my team. I was fortunate enough to lead it for 7 years as caucus chair. I'll miss the meeting the most. The great leaders that I served under here were John Lynn Staunton, Margie LeBreton, Claude Carignan, Larry Smith, and now Donald Platt. My second favorite meeting was the National Caucus, and I will miss that as well. As Senate Caucus Chair, I was Vice Chair of National Caucus, and I got to chair a few of those meetings during that time. I'll miss hearing the elected members debate with the passion, composure, and intellect. Every week I spent here is something I'll always treasure. To witness our leaders, Andrew Scheer, Ronna Ambrose, Prime Minister Harper, Peter MacKay, Joe Clark, and Jean Charest confront problems of party and country was a privilege for me. And finally, to the people of Saskatchewan, my one and only home, thank you for the privilege of serving you. I have tried to represent my province and my region with as much fervor as I could muster. We'll weather this latest storm of failed Liberal policies. Of that I am sure. Your elected members will see to it. And so my parting words of advice for this Prime Minister, as we tend to get a little partisan, I feel better. All right? For the Prime Minister, as he searches for Western representation, is to look no further than across the aisle to those elected members there who he should listen to. His solution to Western representation is staring at him every day, selected by the people of Canada. And to all senators, it has been a privilege working with you, and I mean that. You are here bearing a huge responsibility, and I believe you will pass the test. I'll miss this place. In preparing for a retirement party at home on Saturday, I created a slideshow and had to choose music. And the first song I chose was Simple Man by Travis Tritt. I thought that was perfect. The second one was Alabama, I Get Things Done. And the last song was the easiest, Closing Time, by one of my favorite songwriters and wordsmith, Leonard Cohen. Now, I'm sure when he wrote this verse that I'm about to quote, when he painted that picture of days and time gone by, he was not thinking of the Senate. But they are words for all of us, and he sings, the fiddler fiddles something so sublime. All the women tear their blouses off, and the men, they dance on the polka dots. And it's partner found and partner lost, and it's hell to pay when the fiddler stops. It's closing time. I hope the picture I painted over 26 years will stand the test of time. Thank you.